How's it going, everyone? Today I want to show off how to install Kali Linux from start to finish. If you're unfamiliar with Kali Linux, then I'll quote from their website on this one. Kali Linux is an open source Debian-based Linux distribution geared towards various information security tasks such as penetration testing, security research, computer forensics, and reverse engineering. Ultimately, what this means in short is it comes bundled with lots of IT security testing tools. This is not what I would consider a daily driver operating system, but something that you would dabble with in like a home lab or something of that sort. If you want a daily driver Linux distro, then I'd recommend Debian, Ubuntu, or Linux Mint, which I have created guides for should you be interested in those. Before I begin, I want to just mention that all the websites I show off I will include in the description below. I will also include a link for recommended thumb drives to use as the installation media should you need those as well. Lastly, if you find this video to be useful, I'd appreciate it if you like it and subscribe to my channel to keep up my latest video releases. Anyhow, let's get started. So for the system requirements, you're really looking at wanting 8GB of RAM or more in your machine. It mentions a few spots here, but really to fully utilize a lot of the applications and whatnot, 8GB of RAM or more is really the ideal way to go. And then as far as a processor goes, Kali Linux is more fine-tuned for Intel-based processors. AMD processors I've seen people have issues with, so when in doubt, go with an Intel-based machine. And the same thing goes for the Mac side, which it does mention over here. Ultimately, the new M series processors are basically a no-go for Kali Linux, as it basically states that you really need to be running it on the Intel-based Macs, so just throwing that out there. As far as disk space goes, this is where it gets a little complicated here. If I click on Kali installation sizes, then it really depends on what you end up selecting for the packages that get installed. So for instance, the leanest version would be going with Kali Linux Core and going in the headless environment, aka there is no desktop experience, so 1.5 gigs, or at the greatest extent of going Kali Linux Everything, with the KDE desktop environment, then you're looking at 36 gigs of space that would be utilized. So moving on, let's start the process of downloading the Kali Linux ISO. So in the preparing for the installation, number 1 here, download Kali Linux. So let's right click on this, click on open link in new tab, and we'll scroll down here. So you do have a number of options, but for the sake of today's video, we are sticking with the Kali ISOs for Intel-based PCs. So I'll right click on this, open link in new tab as well. This is more or less just my preference in case I have to go back and take a look at things. You have a whole bunch of options on this page here. So you've got installer images, virtual machines, ARM, mobile, cloud. If we scroll down, containers, live boot, Windows subsystem for Linux. But for today's video, we are sticking with just the installer images. So we'll click on this. So we do have a number of options here. One is going to be the installer, so that's the complete offline installation with customizations. The weekly, which is untested images with the latest updates. The net installer, which means that all packages are downloaded during the installation. And then the everything option, which is image for air-gapped networks. Notice the size differences between all of these. The net installer would be the smallest option as it's downloading everything that it needs, whereas obviously everything is 11 gigs. We're going to stick with the installer that has complete offline installation with customizations, and you'll also notice that there are 32-bit and the Apple Silicon options here, but today's video we are sticking with the 64-bit option for Intel processors. So we'll go ahead and click on this, and then just be patient as it downloads, as it is 4 gigs of data that needs to be pulled down. Alright, now that's downloaded, I'm just going to click on the folder here just so we can click on the show in folder, but I am going to minimize it for the time being just in case we have to reference that. So next up we are going to use a tool called Rufus. If you are unfamiliar with Rufus, Rufus is a free and incredibly lightweight application which can make bootable thumb drives. So on the website for Rufus, if you scroll down about midway, then you have the download options here. I always just select the standard version, so we'll click on this option here, download it, and then let's actually pop open our downloads. Now one thing we need to do, so let's go to the start menu and type in Windows space security. And it should pop up here. Click on this and then click on virus and threat protection, and then virus and threat protection settings. Click on manage settings. And then let's just toggle off real-time protection and click yes for the UAC. Now the reason that's why we're doing this is because Kali Linux has many security applications on it that get flagged as false positives. And so the problem is that Windows Defender will basically act as Pac-Man, gobbling up the data as it's trying to be written to the thumb drive. So everything is perfectly safe here. It's just that unfortunately Windows Defender does not like those apps that are going to be pulled in as we are making the bootable media. So with that turned off, let's close out of this, and then let's double click on Rufus and click yes for the UAC prompt. Nice thing with Rufus is that it doesn't have to be installed. It's very lightweight. It's just a basic executable, so it's pretty snazzy if you haven't used it before. Let's click on select, and then if it doesn't point to your downloads folder or where your Kali Linux ISO is located, then you may have to manually search for it. In my case, I left it in the downloads folder, so I will highlight it, click on open, let Rufus work its magic here. And then one thing just to be warned on is that if you have anything on your thumb drive or data that you didn't back up that you meant to back up, do so now before starting this process, because we are going to nuke everything on the thumb drive as we apply the image to it. So I'm fine with it, so I'll click start. And then I leave everything as Rufus's recommended settings here. So I'll leave this option, we'll click OK, and then it's going to say, are you sure you want to destroy the data on the drive? We'll click OK for yes. Sometimes there is another prompt that comes up, and I would leave the recommended setting for that as well to pull the file that may have to be downloaded. And then just hit yes or continue for that, and then you would be at this point. Anyhow, just be patient as it crunches along here. Alright, so if all went well, we should be at the ready state and no errors would have popped up. We can click close, and we can close out of that. So next up is going to be trying to get the machine to actually boot off of the thumb drive. Every make and model, unfortunately, is always different with the key that's needed to actually get the machine to boot from the thumb drive. It could be the F1 key, F2, F4, F6, F8, F9, F10, F12, the delete key. So my recommendation is, if you don't know what the boot key is for your machine, then to just Google it. That way it will save you the whole hassle of continuously rebooting the machine and mashing keys and hoping that it's going to do the trick for you. So anyhow, I am going to shut this machine down. I will plug the thumb drive into it, and then I will boot it back up. In my case, I'm using a Lenovo. And at least for my Lenovo desktop, it's the F12 key. It's not necessarily the same for all Lenovos, but for mine, F12, so that's what I'll be mashing. Alright, so I'm just going to keep mashing the F12 key here. Now naturally, your temporary boot order screen is going to look different, potentially. But anyhow, for mine, USB hard disk drive is right here, so I will just use the down arrow keys to get down to it, and I'll hit enter. And just be patient as it loads from the thumb drive. So you'll be hit with a few options here. One is the graphical install, advanced options, accessible dark contrast installer menu, and install with speech synthesis. For the sake of this video, I'm going to choose this graphical install. We'll hit enter. Just be patient as it loads up the next screen. So the first main setup screen we're going to be hit with here is going to be your language selection screen. So choose what language you need here and then click continue. In my case, English is fine, so I'll click continue. Next up is going to be your select location screen. Select your location and then click continue. United States for me looks fine. I will click continue. Next up will be configure your keyboard. I'm going to leave mine as American English, but select what you need and click continue. Just be patient as it goes through a few different screens here as it loads up components and whatnot. If you have multiple network controllers on your machine, for instance a wired network and also wireless, then you'll be hit with this screen here. In my case, my recommendation is always to, at least for the installation portion, stay on a wired connection if possible. If wired is not an option, you've got a laptop that only has wireless in it and you don't have like a USB NIC network dongle, then you can go with wireless, but recommendation, go wired at least for the installation. So I'll leave it on my wired Ethernet 0 here. I'll click continue. Next up is going to be the host name option here. You can feel free to leave it as the default. You can change it to whatever you want. For the sake of the video, I'm going to name this as just Cali. And this is what the machine will show up as on the network. Click continue. If you have a domain, you can enter the information in here. This machine is not on a domain, so I'll click continue. And that's going to ask you to start setting up the user account. And I'll just type in digital here. You can feel free to type in your full name here, whatever you want. Click continue. This is the actual setup portion. So if you want the user account to actually be different, you can change it here, or you can leave it as is. I will leave mine as is. Click continue. And then you'll need to set a password for it. And obviously the recommendation is to go with something nice and long and complex. In my case, I'm just going to put something basic in just for the sake of this video, but do not put in a basic password. And I'll click continue. Next up, we'll be configuring the clock. So my time zone looks fine for Eastern. I'll click continue. As far as the partition disks selection here, I recommend using guided use entire disk. You can of course research these other options here, but for the sake of this video, we are going to leave it as use entire disk. We'll click continue. It's going to give us a disk selection here. So as you can see, there is the thumb drive here, the USB disk. As you can see here, it's 32 gigs. And then there is the actual hard drive for the machine here. Hopefully your hard drive does show up. And then I'm going to leave this as the recommended where all files are in one partition. However, if you want to use any of these other options here, you can feel free to research them if they are more to your liking. I will leave this as is. We'll click continue. And then one thing before we jump to the next screen, which it is going to warn us anyhow, but if there's any data on the hard drive that you need to back up, do so before moving on. You can always back out of the installer here, back up the data, and then go back through the steps that we previously have done with the setup so far and continue on once you have the data backed up. Anyhow, I don't have any data to back up, so I will leave it as finished partitioning and write changes to disk. Click continue. It's going to warn us here and say it's going to destroy all the data. Another fail-safe spot if you need to back up any data. Anyhow, we'll click on yes to write the changes to the disk and click continue, and then just be patient as it works its magic here, installing the base system. Alright, so you have the software selection screen here. I will leave everything as the default here, but there is the option to basically change up your desktop environment. So by default, XFCE, which is Kali's default desktop environment, is checked. However, if you wanted GNOME or the KDE Plasma desktop environment, then you could uncheck and check whichever one you want. So if you want KDE, this is how it look. If you wanted GNOME, that's how it look. If you want XFCE, then that's how it should look. Anyhow, like I said, for the sake of this video, I will leave it on the default, and we will also leave all the default options down here for the various tools. So we'll click on continue, and then just be patient as this crunches along, installing the software. Alright, so if everything went well, then we should hopefully see installation complete. At this point, what I'll do is I'll click continue, and when the machine goes down, as it's rebooting, I'll pull the thumb drive, and then hopefully it'll boot up for us and we'll continue on. So let's click continue here, and I will pull the thumb drive. And then real quick, you will be met with this screen here. It will down count from about 5 seconds. So there's a few options. One is the default, which is going to run the Kali GNU Linux. There's the advanced options for Kali GNU Linux, and there's the UEFI firmware settings. Anyhow, just wanted to show that off, but I will just select Kali GNU Linux here, hit enter, and now we should be at the login screen. So go ahead and type in the username that you set as well as the password and hit enter. And now that we are logged in, let's go through a general overview of the operating system here. Starting in the top right corner, so the furthest to the right icon here is going to be the power options. So you'll be able to log out, restart, shut down. You can suspend it, hibernate it, hybrid sleep, switch user. You can also save the session for future logins, which I believe saves the apps that you had open. They will immediately launch again as soon as you log in. And then there's the cancel button here. And then there is the padlock, which is going to lock the machine. And then we'll log back in here. And then to the left of that, you have your system clock. If you hover over it, it will show the date. And if you left click on it, it will show the calendar here. And then to the left of that, if we click on this, this will give you presentation mode, and then also it will give you the option for settings for Power Manager. So within Power Manager here, there's the button options. You can also change up status notifications and system tray. You can click on system, and so it mentions system sleep mode is set to suspend. Display shows blank after 10 minutes, put to sleep after 10 minutes, switch off after 15 minutes. You can also toggle that off. There's also the security option here for light locker, which currently automatically lock the session when screensaver is activated. And you can also do when screensaver is deactivated or never. Display locking after screensaver for 5 seconds, lock screen when system is going to sleep. So that is that for those options. Next up, this little bell here is going to be the notifications section. So if anything for notifications will pop up, you will find them in here. You can also set a do not disturb, and you can also clear the log, and there's also the notification settings. Next up is going to be your volume options here, which we'll click on. So the notification settings, there's a whole bunch of different options here that you can feel free to mess around with. There's appearance options, applications, and the log options. We'll close out of that. To the left is going to be the volume options here. So you have your audio and your mic settings here. And then there is monitor of built-in audio, analog stereo. You can select options here. There's also the audio mixer if we click on that. And you'll have a number of options for playback, recording, output devices, and input devices. So you can feel free to change up what you want to change up in there. Next up is going to be the network options. So since I have this on Ethernet here, we can see wired connection 1 is showing up here. And then you also have Wi-Fi options down here if the machine actually has a wireless controller in it. So you could have your available networks that you can select by clicking on this. You can connect to hidden Wi-Fi networks. You can create a new Wi-Fi network. There's also VPN connections that you can add here. And then if you've noticed up here, the left-hand side is CPU utilization, and then the right-hand side is memory utilization. If you actually click on this, left click on it, then your task manager will come up here and you can observe things here. It also has settings in here that you can change up, column options, add, remove columns. We'll close out of that. Next up, let's start all the way to the left here. So this is basically your start menu for applications. And it starts off with favorites, recently used, all applications, which literally shows you every single application that is on here. You've got your settings, which there is a lot of setting options here that you can feel free to go through. Big one may be your display settings. There's the usual applications, information and gathering applications, vulnerability analysis, web application analysis, database assessment, password attacks, wireless attacks, reverse engineering, exploitation tools, sniffing and spoofing, post-exploitation, forensics, reporting tools, social engineering tools, Kali and OffSec links. In the bottom, if we hover over this, there's a logout option. And here's the power option again, just as you saw in the top right corner. And then you've got settings manager down here, which you can select for getting into settings as well. Moving over to the next one on the right, we have the minimize all open windows and show the desktop. There is the files option here. So you get open folder, open in terminal, create folder, create text document, and then it's going to show you all the individual folders here, which basically give you the same exact options for all of those. And then to the right of that is your text editor. And then next one over is going to be Firefox. And then the next over is the terminal emulator. And then if you actually click this little arrow here, then you'll have root terminal emulator and PowerShell. And then these numbers up here are basically your workspace options. And then on the desktop, you've got your trash, file system. If we click on this, it will show you the folder directories and what have you on the machine. Also show network devices. And then you've got your home, which is going to open your home folder. If you right click on the desktop, you have create launcher, create URL link, create folder, create document. You can paste, copy terminal here, open as root, open a new window, arrange desktop icons, desktop settings, and applications. Now I'm not going to do a super deep dive here, but let's take a look at just some setting options that you may want to change up. So if we go back to the little start menu here, and then we click on settings, and then let's click on settings manager, and we can expand this. So one big one may be to select appearance, and you can select a number of different options here for styles. For instance, you could do Windows 10, set things to purple, purple dark, Cali dark, add weighted dark. Funny how I'll just leave that as Cali dark. You can also add stuff. There's icon settings here, fonts, other settings, and we'll just go back down to the bottom right here and click on all settings to bring us back. Another one may be to click on desktop, and this is where you'll find a bunch of wallpaper options if you wanted to choose a different one. There's also menu options, icon options, and we'll go back to all settings. Another big one people may want to select is the display options. This is where you can change up your resolution, scaling, refresh rate, any sort of rotation that you need to do. And then there's also the advanced section here that you can feel free to dive into. So that's really all there is for the tour that I'll show off here. There's a lot of stuff that you can dive into. Feel free to take a look at the apps that are preloaded on here. You can obviously always add even more applications if you need to, and you can always do a little bit of research to figure out how to utilize those applications that you do have available to you here. Anyhow, so that's all you need to do to install Kali Linux. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. I try to release a new video every 1 to 2 weeks. I also invite you to check out my other video guides if you have not done so already. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.